On June 16, 1944, a 14-year-old boy walked into South Carolina's death chamber. Too small for the electric chair, they stacked books on the seat so the electrodes could reach him. He became the youngest person executed in 20th century America. After a trial that lasted just 10 minutes, this wasn't an isolated case. For centuries, America sent children to their deaths, a practice abandoned by most nations long before. From 1642 to 2005, over 360 juveniles faced execution for crimes committed before their 18th birthday. In fact, Case 1 would leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about American justice, because the physical and psychological cruelty of this execution makes his case especially disturbing and tragic. We are going to expose the final hours of America's youngest death row inmates, their shocking crimes, their controversial trials, their unexpected last meals, their haunting final words, and the moment the state extinguished their young lives. Welcome to Criminal Tapes. If you're new here, subscribe now and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Our community spans the globe, united by these powerful stories that changed American justice forever. Case 12, Gerald Mitchell, Texas, June 4, 1985, Houston, Texas. 17-year-old Gerald Mitchell and his 16-year-old accomplice approached Charles Anthony Marino and Hector Munguia under the pretense of wanting to buy marijuana. When the four met in a secluded area, Mitchell pulled out a .25 caliber pistol and demanded money. After robbing Marino and Munguia of $40 and a wristwatch, Mitchell ordered them to lie face down on the ground. He then shot both men in the back of the head at point-blank range. Marino died instantly. Munguia, despite being shot in the head, survived and later identified Mitchell as the shooter. 3 days later, Mitchell committed another robbery, this time shooting and killing Kathy Ann Nguyen, a 20-year-old woman, outside a Houston convenience store. Police arrested Mitchell shortly after this second murder when he was found with the gun used in both shootings. During his trial for Marino's murder, prosecutors presented ballistic evidence linking Mitchell to both killings and testimony from Munguia, who identified Mitchell as the shooter. The defense argued that Mitchell came from a troubled background and had been under the influence of drugs during the crimes. The jury deliberated for just 15 minutes before finding Mitchell guilty of capital murder. On January 22, 1986, he was sentenced to death. For the next 15 years, Mitchell's case moved through the appeals process. His attorneys argued that his age at the time of the crime should exempt him from execution. They also presented evidence of his troubled childhood and history of drug abuse. All appeals were denied. As his execution date approached, Mitchell's case gained attention from human rights organizations opposed to juvenile executions. The European Union and American Bar Association petitioned for clemency, but Texas Governor Rick Perry declined to intervene. His last meal request was an assorted bag of Jolly Ranchers hard candies. On October 22, 2001, guards led Mitchell to the death chamber at the Walls Unit in Huntsville. His final statement was brief. "I want to thank my family for providing a lawyer for me. I love my family. Tell everyone I said goodbye and that I love them." At 6:20 p.m., Gerald Mitchell was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 33 years old. Mitchell's execution came at a time when the United States was increasingly isolated in its practice of executing juvenile offenders. He was the 18th person executed in the modern era for a crime committed as a minor, with 13 of those executions occurring in Texas alone. His case contributed to the growing body of evidence that would eventually lead the Supreme Court to ban juvenile executions in 2005. Case 11, Gary Graham/Shaka, Texas, May 13, 1981, Houston, Texas. Bobby Lambert, a 53-year-old man, was shot and killed during a robbery outside a Safeway supermarket. The killer stole $100 from Lambert before fleeing the scene. A week later, police arrested 17-year-old Gary Graham in connection with a string of armed robberies. While in custody, he was charged with Lambert's murder, based primarily on the testimony of a single eyewitness, Bernadine Scalern, who claimed she saw Graham shoot Lambert through her car windshield from about 30 to 40 feet away at night. No physical evidence connected Graham to the murder. The murder weapon was never found. None of the fingerprints at the scene matched Graham's. Two other witnesses who were closer to the crime than Skillern stated that Graham was not the shooter, but they were never called to testify at trial. Despite these inconsistencies, Graham was convicted of capital murder and sentenced to death in October 1981. The entire trial lasted just 3 days. While on death row, Graham converted to Islam and changed his name to Shaka Sankofa. He maintained his innocence throughout his incarceration, admitting to the armed robberies but insisting he did not kill Lambert. Over the next 19 years, Sankofa's case gained international attention. Celebrities including Danny Glover, Kenny Rogers, and Bianca Jagger advocated for a new trial. Amnesty International, the NAACP, and even the European Union petitioned Texas Governor George W. Bush for clemency. As his execution date approached, thousands of protesters gathered outside the prison in Huntsville. The case became a flashpoint in the 2000 presidential campaign, with then-Governor Bush's handling of death penalty cases under intense scrutiny. All appeals were denied. The Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles voted 12-5 against clemency. Governor Bush declined to intervene. Sankofa declined a last meal. On June 22, 2000, guards led Sankofa to the death chamber. He resisted, requiring 5 guards to carry him to the gurney. His final statement was lengthy and defiant. "I would like to say that I did not kill Bobby Lambert, that I'm an innocent black man that is being murdered. This is a lynching that is happening in America tonight. I am not angry with you. When I see my ancestors, I will tell them that I saw some good whites." At 8:49 p.m., Gary Graham/Shaka Sankofa was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 36 years old. Sankofa's execution remains one of the most controversial in American history, raising profound questions about eyewitness testimony, racial bias in the justice system, and the execution of potentially innocent people. Case 10. Glenn McGinnis, Texas, August 1, 1990, Montgomery County, Texas. 17-year-old Glenn Charles McGinnis entered a dry cleaning store where 30-year-old Leta Ann Wilkerson was working alone. McGinnis pulled out a .25 caliber pistol and demanded money from the register. After Wilkerson handed over approximately $140, McGinnis ordered her to move to the back of the store. There he shot her 4 times, once in the head and 3 times in the back. He then fled the scene in Wilkerson's car. Police arrested McGinnis a week later when he was spotted driving the stolen vehicle. In his possession, they found the murder weapon and items purchased with the stolen money. During questioning, McGinnis confessed to the murder. What emerged during his trial was the horrific childhood McGinnis had endured. Born to a 15-year-old mother who worked as a prostitute, McGinnis suffered severe physical and sexual abuse throughout his early years. His mother's clients would beat him with extension cords. By age 11, his mother was injecting him with heroin and cocaine. At 14, he was forced out of his home and lived on the streets. Despite this traumatic background, prosecutors argued that the calculated nature of the crime, bringing a gun, executing the victim to eliminate witnesses, and stealing her car, demonstrated McGinnis's capacity for adult decision-making. The jury convicted him of capital murder and sentenced him to death. For the next decade, McGinnis's attorneys fought to save his life, arguing that his age and traumatic background should exempt him from execution. They presented evidence that McGinnis had an IQ of 79 and read at a second-grade level. All appeals were denied. For his last meal, McGinnis requested a cheeseburger with lettuce, tomato, bacon, onion rings, and ketchup. On January 25, 2000, guards led McGinnis to the death chamber at the Walls unit in Huntsville. In his final statement, he expressed remorse. "I'd like to say I'm sorry for the pain I've caused you. I'm sorry for taking your daughter's life. I ask God for forgiveness, and I ask you for the same. I know it may be hard, but I'm sorry for what I did. To my family, I love each and every one of you. Be strong." At 6:30 p.m., Glenn Charles McGinnis was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 27 years old. McGinnis's execution came at a pivotal moment in the national debate over juvenile capital punishment. Case 9. T.J. Jones, Texas. February 2, 1994, San Jacinto County, Texas. 17-year-old T.J. Jones and 3 friends decided to steal a car. They targeted 75-year-old Willard Davis, who was known to carry large amounts of cash and owned a 1992 GMC pickup truck. The group approached Davis at his home, asking if they could borrow abilities. When Davis turned to get the abilities, Jones shot him in the back of the head with a .357 Magnum revolver. After Davis fell, Jones stood over him and fired a second shot into his head at point-blank range. The teenagers stole Davis's wallet containing $3, the keys to his truck, and a knife. They fled in Davis's vehicle but were arrested the next day after being spotted in the stolen truck. During questioning, Jones confessed to the murder. He told investigators that he had shot Davis because the old man had seen his face. At trial, prosecutors presented this confession along with testimony from Jones's accomplices, who had agreed to testify against him in exchange for lesser charges. The defense argued that Jones came from a troubled background, had been drinking heavily on the day of the murder, and had been influenced by older peers. The jury remained unmoved. On October 11, 1994, they found Jones guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. For the next 8 years, Jones's case moved through the appeals process. His attorneys argued that his age and mental capacity should exempt him from execution. They presented evidence that Jones had an IQ of just 78 and functioned at the level of a 10-year-old. All appeals were denied. For his last meal, Jones requested triple meat cheeseburger with fried bun and everything, French fries, ketchup, 4 pieces of chicken, and 1 fried pork chop sandwich. On August 8, 2002, guards led Jones to the death chamber at the Walls Unit in Huntsville. In his final statement, he apologized to the victim's family. "I would like to thank all of my friends and supporters who gave me love over the years. I would like to apologize to the victim's family for the suffering I caused. I hope they will forgive me someday. I want to apologize to my family for the pain and suffering they have gone through. I love you all, and I will see you on the other side." At 6:18 p.m., T.J. Jones was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 25 years old. Jones was the second juvenile offender executed in Texas in a single week in August 2002, highlighting the state's aggressive approach to capital punishment, even as national sentiment was beginning to turn against executing those who committed crimes as minors. Case 8. Napoleon Beasley, Texas, April 19, 1994. Tyler, Texas. 17-year-old Napoleon Beasley and 2 friends followed a Mercedes-Benz driven by 63-year-old John Luddig, a prominent local businessman and father of federal judge J. Michael Luddig. When Luddig and his wife pulled into their garage, Beasley approached with a .5 caliber handgun. Beasley shot Luddig in the head at point-blank range. As Mrs. Luddig fled screaming into the house, Beasley fired at her but missed. He and his accomplices attempted to steal the Mercedes but crashed it into a retaining wall before abandoning the vehicle and fleeing in their own car. What made this case particularly shocking was Beasley's background. He wasn't a troubled youth from a broken home. He was the son of a city councilman, president of his senior class, and a star football player with no prior criminal record. Police quickly identified Beasley and his accomplices. All 3 were arrested within days. During his trial in 1995, prosecutors portrayed Beasley as a calculated killer who murdered Luddig solely to steal his luxury car. The defense argued that the crime was an impulsive act by an immature teenager. After deliberating for 3 hours, the jury found Beasley guilty of capital murder and sentenced him to death. Beasley's case gained international attention due to his age and exemplary background. 12 jurors from his original trial signed affidavits saying they would have sentenced him to life had that option been available. 3 Supreme Court justices recused themselves from hearing his appeal because of their connections to Judge Luddig. The European Union, American Bar Association, and numerous religious organizations petitioned for clemency. Despite this widespread support, all appeals were denied. Texas Governor Rick Perry refused to grant a stay of execution, Beasley declined a last meal. On May 28, 2002, guards led Beasley to the death chamber at the Walls unit in Huntsville. His final statement was remarkably reflective. "The act I committed to put me here was not just heinous, it was senseless, but the person that committed that act is no longer here. I am. I'm not going to struggle physically against any restraints. I'm not going to shout, use profanity, or make idle threats. Understand, though, that I'm not only upset, but I'm angry. I'm not only angry, I'm outraged that I was denied justice, but I'm not bitter, and I'm not going to let anger rule my life. Tonight I will forgive all those who have offended me during my life." At 6:17 p.m., Napoleon Beasley was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 25 years old. Case 7. Toronto, Patterson, Texas. June 6, 1995, Dallas, Texas. 17-year-old Toronto Patterson arrived at his aunt's home with a .38 caliber pistol. Inside were his 25-year-old aunt Kimberly Brewer, his 3-year-old cousin Jennifer Brewer, and his 6-year-old cousin Ollie Brown Jr. Patterson shot his aunt multiple times in the head and chest. He then turned the gun on the children, shooting each of them in the head at close range. After the murders, Patterson stole his aunt's Chevrolet Blazer and fled the scene. Police arrested Patterson the next day when he attempted to sell the stolen vehicle. During questioning, Patterson initially denied involvement, but eventually confessed, claiming the shootings resulted from an argument with his aunt over money she owed him. However, prosecutors believed the real motive was to steal the Blazer. At trial, the prosecution presented Patterson's confession and physical evidence linking him to the crime scene. The defense argued that Patterson had been coerced into confessing and lacked the intent required for capital murder. They also emphasized his youth and difficult upbringing. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before finding Patterson guilty of capital murder. On July 1, 1995, less than a month after the crime, he was sentenced to death. For the next 7 years, Patterson's attorneys appealed his sentence, arguing that his age at the time of the murders should exempt him from execution. They also raised concerns about the quality of his legal representation during the trial. All appeals were denied. In 2002, as his execution date approached, Patterson's case gained attention from human rights organizations opposed to juvenile executions. Amnesty International and the American Bar Association called for clemency, but Texas Governor Rick Perry declined to intervene. For his last meal, Patterson requested 6 pieces of fried chicken, 4 jalapeno peppers, 4 buttermilk biscuits, salad with Italian dressing, 6 Sprite soft drinks, and white cake with white icing. On August 28, 2002, guards led Patterson to the death chamber at the Walls unit in Huntsville. In his final statement, he maintained his innocence. "I want to thank all of my friends and supporters for all they have done for me. I love you all. I'm ready." Case 6. Scott Allenhane, Oklahoma. October 6, 1997, Tulsa, Oklahoma. Michael William Houghton and Laura Lee Sanders, both 22 years old, were sitting in Houghton's car outside a Tulsa nightclub when 2 teenagers approached them. Scott Allenhane, 17, and Robert Wayne Lambert, 21, forced their way into the vehicle at gunpoint and drove the couple to a secluded area. After robbing their victims of credit cards and cash, Hane and Lambert locked Houghton and Sanders in the trunk of the car. They drove to a rural area near Sapulpa where they used the couple's credit cards at various locations. Throughout this time, Houghton and Sanders remained trapped in the trunk, pleading for their lives. Eventually, Hane and Lambert decided they couldn't leave witnesses. They doused the car with gasoline and set it ablaze with the couple still alive inside. Autopsies would later confirm that Houghton and Sanders died from smoke inhalation and thermal burns. Police arrested Hane and Lambert the next day when they attempted to use the victims' credit cards again. Both confessed to the murders. At trial, Hane's defense argued that he had suffered severe abuse as a child and had been heavily influenced by the older Lambert. The jury remained unmoved, convicting him of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of kidnapping, and 1 count of robbery. On November 2, 1988, the judge sentenced Hane to death. For the next 15 years, Haynes' case moved through the appeals process. His attorneys argued that his age at the time of the crime should exempt him from execution. In 2002, the U.S. Supreme Court agreed to hear arguments on whether executing juvenile offenders constituted cruel and unusual punishment. While this case was pending, Haynes received a temporary stay. However, in January 2003, the court declined to extend the prohibition on executing offenders who were 16 or 17 at the time of their crimes. Haynes' execution was rescheduled. For his last meal, Haynes requested a cheeseburger, onion rings, fruit pie, and a chocolate milkshake. On April 3, 2003, guards led Haynes to Oklahoma's death chamber. He declined to make a final statement. At 8:35 p.m., Scott Allen Haynes was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 32 years old. Haynes' execution carried special significance as one of the last juvenile offenders put to death in America. Just 2 years later, in 2005, the Supreme Court eventually reversed its position and banned all executions for crimes committed under age 18. Case 5. Johnny Frank Garrett, Texas. October 31, 1981, Amarillo, Texas. While residents celebrated Halloween, someone broke into the St. Francis Convent. Inside, 76-year-old Sister Tadia Benz slept peacefully until an intruder entered her room. The attacker assaulted the elderly nun, stabbed her repeatedly, and strangled her with a cord from her nightgown. Police discovered Sister Benz's body the next morning. Fellow nuns reported a watch and small amount of cash missing from her room. The brutal nature of the crime against a beloved religious figure shocked the community and created immense pressure on authorities to find the killer. 2 weeks later, police arrested 17-year-old Johnny Frank Garrett, who lived across the street from the convent. Their evidence, a partial palm print found in the convent, and witness statements that Garrett had been seen wearing a watch similar to the one stolen from Sister Benz. During his trial in January 1982, prosecutors portrayed Garrett as a sadistic killer. The defense argued that Garrett, who had suffered severe childhood abuse and had the mental capacity of a 10-year-old, could not have committed such a calculated crime. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before finding him guilty and sentencing him to death. For the next decade, Garrett's attorneys fought to save his life. They uncovered troubling inconsistencies in the case. The palm print was never conclusively matched to Garrett, the stolen watch was never found, and a similar murder of an elderly woman occurred in the same neighborhood while Garrett was in custody. Despite these concerns, all appeals were denied. Pope John Paul II personally requested clemency from Texas Governor Ann Richards, who granted a temporary stay but ultimately allowed the execution to proceed. For his last meal, Garrett requested only ice cream. On February 11, 1992, guards led Garrett to the death chamber at the Walls Unit in Huntsville. His final statement was disturbing and profanity-laden, cursing the system that had condemned him. "I'd like to thank my family for loving me and taking care of me. The rest of the world can kiss my..." Redacted. At 12:14 a.m., Johnny Frank Garrett was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 28 years old. Years after his execution, DNA testing unavailable during his trial identified another suspect in similar crimes. In 2004, Cuban national Leoncio Rueda confessed to the murder of another elderly woman in Amarillo during the same time period, using the same methods. This revelation raised serious questions about Garrett's guilt, making his case one of the most controversial juvenile executions in American history. Before we continue with the remaining cases, I want to ask you, at what age do you believe a person becomes fully responsible for their actions? Is there an age below which rehabilitation should always be prioritized over punishment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you're finding value in this exploration of America's darkest judicial history, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to Criminal Tapes. Your support allows us to continue bringing these important stories to light. Now let's continue our journey through the final moments of America's youngest death row inmates. Case 4. Janet Terry Roach, South Carolina. December 14, 1977. Cuban routine car, South Korea. 17-year-old James Terry Roach and his 22-year-old accomplice, Joseph Carl Shaw, were driving around looking for someone to rob when they spotted 14-year-old Carlotta Hartness and her 17-year-old boyfriend Thomas Taylor sitting in a parked car at a baseball field, armed with a .22 caliber rifle. The pair approached the young couple. They forced Taylor out of the car, marched him into the woods, and shot him 3 times in the head. They then returned to the car, where Hartness remained terrified. Roach and Shaw took turns sexually assaulting her before shooting her 5 times. Police arrested Roach and Shaw within days. Both confessed to the murders. During his confession, Roach claimed Shaw was the mastermind and that he had followed along out of fear. Medical evaluations would later reveal that Roach had an IQ of just 69 and suffered from Huntington's disease, a degenerative brain disorder he had inherited from his mother. Despite his age and mental capacity, Roach was tried as an adult. On December 16, 1977, he pleaded guilty to all charges, including 2 counts of murder, criminal sexual assault, and armed robbery. The judge sentenced him to death. For the next 8 years, Roach's attorneys fought to save his life, arguing that his age, diminished mental capacity, and brain disease should exempt him from execution. The case gained international attention, with Amnesty International and the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights calling for clemency. Even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Javier Perez de Cuellar, appealed to South Carolina Governor Richard Riley to commute Roach's sentence. These pleas fell on deaf ears. On January 10, 1986, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Roach's final appeal. Governor Riley refused to intervene. For his last meal, Roach requested fried chicken, French fries, and a tossed salad. On the morning of January 10, 1986, guards led Roach to South Carolina's electric chair. When asked if he had any final words, he simply said, "I have peace in my heart, and I'm ready to die." At 5:16 a.m., the switch was thrown. 2,000 volts of electricity surged through Roach's body for 30 seconds, followed by a second jolt. At 5:25 a.m., he was pronounced dead. Roach's execution sparked international outrage. The Inter-American Commission on Human Rights formally condemned the United States for violating international law by executing someone who committed crimes as a juvenile. The case became a rallying point for human rights organizations fighting against juvenile executions worldwide. James Terry Roach was the first person executed in South Carolina in nearly 25 years, and the 10th juvenile offender put to death nationwide since the reinstatement of capital punishment in 1976. Case 3. J. Pinkerton, Texas. October 26, 1979, Amarillo, Texas. Sarah Dawn Lawrence, a 30-year-old mother of 3, was home alone when someone broke in through her bathroom window. The intruder stabbed her 33 times and mutilated her body. Police found bloody footprints throughout the house and evidence that the killer had showered before leaving. 2 months later, on December 22, 1979, another Amarillo woman fell victim to a similar attack. Sherry Welch, a 25-year-old furniture store employee, was stabbed multiple times and mutilated in the same distinctive manner. The brutal nature of these crimes shocked the community. For months, Amarillo residents lived in fear as police struggled to identify a suspect. The break came when 17-year-old J. Kelly Pinkerton bragged to friends about the killings, describing details only the murderer would know. Police arrested Pinkerton on May 12, 1980. Though he initially confessed, he quickly recanted. Physical evidence, however, told a different story. Investigators matched his palm print to one found on Lawrence's bathroom window. His footprints matched those at the crime scene. Most damning, they found a knife in his possession with traces of the victim's blood. Pinkerton's trial for the Lawrence murder began in October 1980. The prosecution painted him as a calculating killer who derived pleasure from his victim's suffering. The defense argued that his confession was coerced and the evidence circumstantial. After deliberating for just 3 hours, the jury found him guilty and sentenced him to death. In a separate trial for the Welch murder, Pinkerton received a second death sentence. For the next 8 years, Pinkerton's case moved through the appeals process. His attorneys argued that his age should be a mitigating factor, but Texas courts consistently upheld both sentences. On May 15, 1986, the U.S. Supreme Court rejected Pinkerton's final appeal, clearing the way for his execution. On the evening of May 15, 1986, guards escorted Pinkerton to the death chamber at the Walls Unit in Huntsville, Texas. He declined a last meal. When asked if he had any final words, Pinkerton simply stated, "I would like to tell everyone that I'm sorry about what happened, that I am not guilty, and that I hope they can forgive me for whatever they think I have done." At 12:42 a.m., J. Kelly Pinkerton was pronounced dead by lethal injection. He was 24 years old. Pinkerton's case became a focal point in debates about juvenile justice reform. Advocates argued that his age at the time of his crimes, 17, should have spared him from capital punishment. His execution fueled growing concerns about applying the death penalty to offenders who committed their crimes as minors, contributing to the legal challenges that eventually led to the Supreme Court's 2005 ban on juvenile executions. Case 2, Shane Sellers, Oklahoma. September 8, 1985. Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. While his mother and stepfather slept, 16-year-old Sean Sellers crept into their bedroom with a .44 caliber revolver. He shot his stepfather, Paul Bellofato, once in the head. His mother, Vonda, woke to the sound. Sellers fired 3 times, killing her instantly. This wasn't Sellers' first murder. 6 months earlier, on March 5, he had walked into a convenience store where 32-year-old Robert Bauer was working the night shift. Sellers purchased a soft drink, then shot Bauer point-blank in the face. What drove this teenager to such violence? Sellers had become obsessed with Satanism and the occult. He kept detailed journals describing blood-drinking rituals and his allegiance to demonic forces. In his bedroom, investigators found pentagrams, an altar, and books on witchcraft. Sellers later claimed he killed Bauer as a sacrifice to Satan and murdered his parents because they interfered with his satanic practices. Arrested shortly after his parents' murders, Sellers was tried as an adult. During his trial, he showed little emotion as prosecutors presented his journals and testimony from friends who described his growing fascination with the occult. The jury rejected his insanity defense and found him guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. On September 16, 1986, at age 17, Sellers became the youngest person on Oklahoma's death row. For the next 12 years, Sellers' case wound through the appeals process. While incarcerated, he underwent a dramatic transformation, renouncing Satanism and becoming a born-again Christian. He earned his high school diploma and began ministering to other inmates. In 1992, doctors diagnosed Sellers with multiple personality disorder, now known as dissociative identity disorder, suggesting he had at least 3 distinct personalities at the time of the murders. His attorneys argued this diagnosis, unavailable during his original trial, warranted a new hearing. The courts disagreed. On February 4, 1999, Sellers' final appeal was denied. At 35 minutes past midnight on February 5, he was led to Oklahoma's death chamber at the state penitentiary in McAlester. For his last meal, Sellers requested pizza, cherry Coke, and a chocolate chip cookie. His final statement was lengthy and remorseful. "I would like to say to the families that I'm sorry. I hope through my death you can find some peace. Don't ever think my life was wasted. God has used me in a mighty way. I'm going home. I'm going to a better place." At 12:17 a.m., Sean Sellers was pronounced dead by lethal injection, becoming the first person in over 40 years to be executed for crimes committed at age 16. Case 1, George Stinney, Jr., South Carolina. March 24, 1944, Alcolu, South Carolina. 2 young girls, 11-year-old Betty June Binnicker and 7-year-old Mary Emma Thames, rode their bicycles to pick flowers. They never returned home. When the girls failed to come back for dinner, search parties formed. The next morning, their bodies were discovered in a water-filled ditch. Both had suffered devastating blows to the head. A railroad spike covered in blood and hair lay nearby. George Stinney Jr., a 14-year-old African-American boy, became the immediate suspect after witnesses reported seeing him talking to the girls earlier that day. Police arrested him within hours. According to officers, Stinney confessed after interrogation. Though no written confession was ever produced, no attorney was present, and his parents were not allowed to see him. The trial began on April 24, 1944, just 1 month after the murders. Stinney's court-appointed lawyer, a tax commissioner with political ambitions, called no witnesses and presented no evidence. The all-white jury deliberated for just 10 minutes before finding him guilty. The judge immediately sentenced him to death by electric chair. No appeals were filed. No mercy was granted. Stinney spent 81 days between his arrest and execution without seeing his family. On June 16, 1944, guards led the 5'1", 95-pound boy to South Carolina's electric chair. They used a Bible as a booster seat because he was too small for the chair's fixed electrodes to reach him properly. No last meal was recorded in prison documents. No final words were noted. At 7:30 p.m., the switch was thrown. 2,400 volts surged through his small body. Witnesses reported the oversized mask slipped off during the electrocution, revealing his terrified face. George Stinney Jr. was pronounced dead minutes later, becoming the youngest person executed in the United States in the 20th century. 70 years later, in 2014, Circuit Court Judge Carmen Mullen vacated Stinney's conviction, noting the trial had fundamental constitutional violations of due process. The evidence against him, she ruled, had been insufficient to establish guilt beyond reasonable doubt. On March 1, 2005, the United States Supreme Court ruled in Roper v. Simmons that executing offenders who were under 18 at the time of their crimes constitutes cruel and unusual punishment, violating the Eighth Amendment. This landmark decision saved 72 juvenile offenders from death row and ended a practice that had placed America alongside Iran, Saudi Arabia, and China as the only nations still executing minors. The 22 juvenile offenders executed between 1976 and 2005, including the 12 cases we've examined, represent a chapter of American justice now closed. Their stories reveal the complex intersection of youth, violence, trauma, and punishment that continues to challenge our understanding of justice. These cases force us to confront difficult questions. Can a teenage brain fully comprehend the consequences of violent actions? Does childhood trauma mitigate culpability? Is permanent redemption possible for those who commit heinous acts as minors? What do you think? Was the Supreme Court right to ban juvenile executions? Or should age be just one factor among many when determining punishment? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this exploration valuable, please subscribe to Criminal Tapes for more deep dives into the most compelling true crime cases in history. Until next time, remember that how we treat our most troubled youth reflects the true measure of our justice system.